Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to the organisers for the kind invitation for my first trip to Helsinki, and I'm glad to see that I brought the Australian weather with me. I was reminded in the Deputy Mayor's brief presentation about the need for radical innovation, and ageing is just one challenge among many where radical innovation is required, and where doing more of the same is no longer an option. But what is radical innovation, and how do we do it? How do we actually create new solutions that get better outcomes for people? Over the last 2.5 years, the Australian Centre for Social Innovation has been working to create solutions to improve outcomes for families, for older people and carers, and for kids starting school. I'm going to talk today about some of these experiences and our thoughts about what it actually takes to create radical innovation to address the social innovations, the social challenges that we face. So what do we mean by radical innovation? We're not a bunch of long-haired anarchists running around coming up with crazy ideas. We're actually working in a system that demands rigour and discipline and sort of solid thoughts and practice. So we can't just run around and be entirely creative without any sort of guidance. And yet at the same time, we need to be able to relax our minds a little bit about what our current systems believe and to test those assumptions about the best way to get the outcomes that matter to people. Some of you may have seen this grid before. It's from Charles Leadbeater's work. And he distinguishes between radical and incremental innovation as essentially the difference about whether you're trying to improve the current system or whether you're actually seeking to create a new system. Are you trying to reinvent services or just basically prop up the ones that actually exist? There is, of course, another dimension, and that is innovation that occurs within systems and innovation that occurs outside of systems. Often incremental incremental innovation outside of systems looks at bringing together existing activities, existing services in new ways. This is where a lot of the whole of government, joined up government conversations have been about, and about cross-sectoral partnerships. But there is a more radical opportunity, which is not only to reinvent and reconceive the best way of achieving the outcomes for people, but to actually look at bringing different players to bear, different organisations, different actors to try and achieve those outcomes. So, and I should say, my background, which wasn't really talked about, is I'm a recovering economist and a former public servant. So I say this not with the arrogance of the innovator, but with the humbleness of someone who's been converted to this way of thinking. We tend normally, when we think about innovation in public services, to start up in this left-hand corner because it feels comfortable. It feels safe, and invariably we've invested millions or billions of dollars or euros in our existing services. The last thing we want to do is to throw them out. So often we start in this top left-hand corner and we ask ourselves, how can we improve the user experience of our current services? And there are a couple of assumptions that actually lie at the heart of that question. One is, we believe that our current services are the right ones, and secondly, that we believe the question of innovation is around improving their experience of the service. Now, the work that we do sort of tends to come from the other end of the spectrum. We actually start by saying, well, what outcomes matter to people? Not what does the service actually provide, but what outcomes really matter to people when we ask them on the streets and in shopping malls and in their homes. And then secondly, how can we mobilise all of the available resources, government agencies, NGOs, neighbours, friends, families, to actually help achieve the outcomes that we really want to see in our society? And we believe that this creates many different and interesting possibilities when you're trying to create radical innovation. there is a meeting point in the middle. We have actually done some work with government agencies to help them ask the question about how you do radical innovation with inside systems. But we go back to this point about what outcomes matter to people and what services might actually help you achieve that. And I think all too often we don't ask that question because we're scared of the answer that actually what really might achieve the outcomes for people, our current service mix doesn't do that terribly well. And I'm sure in the panel discussion and others we'll get on to issues around decommissioning and moving. I believe your picture, Laura, had the out with the old model and in with the new model. That's a much more complicated procedure than a simple cartoon can describe. So hopefully that set a little bit of context for what I'm about to show you. The first piece of work that we did with our new centre, which is only a few years old, looked at the issue of families that were in crisis. The system question, that is the question that was proposed to us, was how can we prevent families from coming into contact with crisis services in the first place? How do we come up with early intervention, preventative measures that stop them coming in contact with child protection? This is a real issue in Australia. The number of families, the number of children that have been removed from Australian families has increased by 50% in the last 10 years. It has huge fiscal costs to social services. It has huge economic and social and emotional costs to our society. And it looked like a pretty good challenge for us to have a crack at. So the system question was, how do we keep families out of crisis services? But the people question, as we quickly found when we got out and actually talked to families, was how can we enable more families to thrive? Not just stay out of crisis services, but actually to get more of the good stuff in life. I'm sure when you go home and see your spouse and you talk about your day, how was your day, dear? Well, the government didn't take our children away, so I think that one's a success. Actually, we define success in a really, really different way. And yet sometimes as public sector agencies and as governments, we don't dare to dream about kind of defining the outcomes we really want to get for people much more ambitiously. So we spent 12 months and we went out and we met families. We did techniques which you'll see shortly in a video I'm about to show you, but we did, for the designers in the audience, we did the ethnographic work. We spent lots of time hanging out with families, understanding what their life was like. We used that insight that it generated to then develop some concepts which we then prototyped, and we're currently rolling this out around Australia. The model is called Family by Family, and effectively what we do is we identify families that have been through tough times and who've come out the other side, and we link them up with families who still want things to change. The insights that this was built on is that there are amazing resources in our community, people who've done it really, really tough and have come out the other side. And these are resources that should be recognised and utilised when we try and sort of build solutions that work. But many agencies ignore these people. They're just grateful that they're not coming back onto their books. The second insight was that people often don't know what they don't know. And so if you're asking people to change their behaviours, you can't give them a list of things that they should do differently. They actually need to see that role modelled for them. And so by combining these two insights, we came up with a method of bringing families together so that families could learn from one another about how you set and achieve goals. So the really important thing in this model, which you'll see in a second, was just how engaged families were in designing this process with us. I saw on the description of the project that you're working on, the Lautazari project is combining the expertise of care providers with the expertise of service designers. And I guess I wanted to show you what happens when you combine it with the expertise of people, the real experts.
No, not at all.
Far from it.
Okay. No, we would not volunteer for anything.
Ever?
Normally? Not at all.
No, we just don't get involved in things. We really don't. For some reason, we just choose not to get involved in a lot of different community type activities, because a lot of the time they're really, I don't know, they almost seem political, where it's about, you know, who runs it and you have to answer to this one and you have to do that and you're not allowed to say this, and they don't actually want any input. Like if you go get involved and you go, oh, I reckon that could be done better, they don't care what you think, they just want you to do what you're told. But with this, it was all about what we thought.
This started where families were at. It didn't actually go in with a predetermined solution and an established program saying, you know, family, you have a particular problem, it needs to be fixed, and here we are as a professional with a solution for you. If we apply this solution, your problem will be fixed.
If policy is going to work, if it's going to be about enabling people to live different lives, then we've got to figure out what people actually need and want and prototype that stuff first before we put in place all of the structures and systems. In the look phase, we're trying to answer the question, what would be a great outcome for people? And to do that, we have to hang out with people, and that's what are known as ethnographic methods. That's trying to figure out what makes people tick, what motivates them, what excites them, what gets them up in the morning.
You're just being with that family and living a day as they live it, experiencing a day as they do, and understanding what the ups and downs look like.
Part of the learning for me, was to learn what an ethnography was and how I would apply that. It's quite a scary process really, because that involved having to actually walk the client's journey, and this was a bit of a displacement of power, I guess.
One of the most important things that I've learnt from this project is the element of prototyping. And if I can explain it in my own words, I understand it as something where you can try and you test something with the people that you're working with, and you get to test it over again until something works.
There's paper prototyping, where you might create a storyboard and put that in front of somebody and ask them to imagine themselves in that situation. And then there's experience prototyping, and experience prototyping is where you really learn the most, because you try out something like a mini version of something or a live version of something over a period of time. So in Family by Family, we hired new staff, we recruited families, we connected them up in link-ups, and those link-ups ran for around 12 weeks. And from that real live experience, we were able to see what worked and keep changing things.
On a Wednesday night dinner, for instance, they'd come and say, look, we've thought of all these things, what do you guys reckon? And we'd all say, no, we don't agree with this, or this one's really great, or maybe change this one a bit. And then next week they come back and go, see, this is what we did. And it was like, hey, they actually listened. Like, we said that wasn't a great idea, and they actually paid attention. And that was a pretty big deal. There were a few nights we went home and went, oh my God, that was our idea.
It's probably one of the few, if not the only programs I've ever seen that's actually allowed that sort of developmental process to go through, you know, over many months. And so somebody sitting a little bit on the outside watching this occur, it was fascinating, but on the other hand it could be a bit frustrating, because you kept on thinking, gosh, that was a pretty good methodology or set of materials or resources you put together to work with these families. Gosh, I'd just be running with that. And then suddenly you gave time for families to sort of pick the eyes out of it and say, yeah, parts of that really worked and other parts were crap.
In the value phase, we're trying to answer the question, what would it take for our prototype solution to actually grow and affect more people? And so that means telling the business case story of it. So that's what kind of social impact are we creating? What kind of cost savings emerge from working in this way in the long term? And the second is the emotional story. So using film and more ethnographic kinds of techniques to really let people know what was the experience like of being part of this solution, and why does it need to exist?
Being part of the prototype, it's been awesome, because I feel like we've had, you know, a say in how things are going to end up being, you know, when it goes through. And I think that's just amazing, because who else is better to help with all of that kind of stuff? Yeah, I mean, there's been a few little hiccups and stuff.
It has challenged me personally and professionally, in every way a person could be challenged. It's right from the start. I'm assessment versus ethnography, and writing a policy versus co-design, and prototyping versus piloting, throwing things out as quickly as you make them. It's just really starting from the bottom up, and I really understand now, and I think it's taken me the full 12 months, but I do really understand the potential that exists when you design and you create something with your end user versus creating something for them that you think will fit them best.
Whilst it can be frustrating at one level to sort of have to sit back and wait for something to develop over time like this, it makes eminent sense that that's exactly what we should be doing in social policy construction, that we shouldn't be jumping to solutions that are half-baked and often don't have any evidence to sort of back them up, and we should actually give ourselves the time and space, not just to actually develop the right programs, but to sit and actually listen to the experts. And the experts are not generally the people that have got professional backgrounds in this arena. The experts are families.
We were just as much developing it as much as the coordinators were, you know what I mean, as well as the other families. And that, I mean, you know, if you can make something like that work and get some of your ideas across, hopefully good ideas across, you know what I mean, and implement some of them, you know what I mean, I think it's like I've said before, it's the ultimate in giving back, you know what I mean. It's absolute gold.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a richer picture of the way we certainly go about doing radical innovation. And Family by Family is now post-prototype. It's now a real live model. It's a real live organisation. It's currently growing. We're testing, validating the model at scale, and hopefully we'll take it around the country later. I guess for me, in coming back to the point I made before about being a converted public servant, I think one of the sort of most powerful moments here was when we finalised the prototype and we launched it with the Premier of South Australia, who had originally provided the seed funding to set the centre up. And afterwards he hung around and spoke to the families, and I watched the families give a policy briefing to the Premier with a degree of sophistication and ownership and pride that I rarely saw matched by my fellow colleagues previously in public policy. And so I think when you can actually design a solution that actually has the users so proud and completely comfortable to describe how this works and what difference it made to their life to the most senior politician in that jurisdiction, I think you're onto something. So that's Family by Family. That's the model of ours that's probably most developed. But I know you're here to talk about design and innovation for ageing. So luckily I have a few other models and ideas that I wanted to show you. These are less developed because we're in the middle of a 12-month project to look at this question, which is how can we enable great living for people in caring roles? As our societies get older, the number of people who are in caring roles in one form or another will also continue to grow. And I think the stats before showed that the cost of formal care is set to explode in Europe as well as in Australia. And so thinking about ways that we can actually enable people to care for one another informally as well as formally is a very, very pressing challenge for us to look at. We use the same model that we use for Family by Family. We went out and we spent time with older people and people in caring relationships to understand their lived experience. We came up with some ideas, and we are just about to start prototyping. So I think this could be possibly a world exclusive for the work that we're doing. Since our first project, we grew our team, and I guess the point I wanted to make here was about the multidisciplinarity of our team. We not only have designers, but we also have people with backgrounds in community development, in local government, in business analysis, as well as the social sciences. And we think by blending these teams, we actually make sure that we hopefully get the best of all of the possible disciplines and hopefully the worst of none. So what did we do? Well, in our look and listen phase, we went out. I think we met with around about 140 people. We recruited them off the streets. Again, quite a challenge often to public servants who kind of find it amusing that we would actually just go and set up a stall on the street and start talking to people, but there we go, we did it. We had tea and cake. We did deeper ethnographies. On the top right-hand corner, that's Susan. She went on holidays with one of the families over the weekend to understand kind of what life was like for them. We also did some service shadowing. So we went to try and understand what the existing services both say that they did, but also what they actually did. What was the experience from the perspective of the user? We then took all of that information, and there was a lot of it, back into the studio to analyse and try to understand some potential opportunity spaces that we could try and make a difference in, as well as some insights that might enable us to think about what particular mechanisms might achieve change in these spaces. And then we produced a report which is called Love-Ins, Lobsters and Racing Cars, which was just a few of the examples of things that popped up when we talked to people about what actually constituted great living for them. And I've got a couple of copies of the report if anyone wants to have a quick look in the break. So we met lots of people, old, young, very old, and not surprisingly, their experiences were very varied. But what we're actually really trying to sort of drive through to in our work was to understand where people were at on the spectrum of getting by to great living, and what possible interventions, interactions could we create to try and help people move along that spectrum. So Barbara's 75, she's Scottish, though she's been in Australia for 30 years, she chain smokes. She has very, very few connections in her community and has very irregular contact with her family. For her, life is just about getting through each day, one day at a time. Mike and Liz have been happily together for 25 years, and they live a fantastic life. They are the ones of the love-ins. Every morning they spend 2 hours in bed just enjoying what it means to be alive before they get up and face the day. And despite the fact that Liz has been living with multiple sclerosis for 25 years and Mike is full-time carer for her, they find ways to continue to sort of bring the joy into their life. So what's going on here, and how can we actually try and draw lessons from those that are experiencing great living to those who are getting by? When we actually started to look at the behaviours that underpin this, we actually saw a set of behaviours that we felt helped enable great living, and these are behaviours that we could help to reinforce and to build. The behaviours include the ability to initiate, to actually reach out and prompt some activity, the willingness and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, the ability to shape the services that are around you and not just to passively receive what you've been given. The willingness to actually enjoy, the ability to enjoy life and to find joy in the small things, and the ability to exchange wisdom, knowledge, and even the practical things like stuff around the house. If we compare that with what we saw at the getting by end of the spectrum, instead of initiating, people tend to avoid asking for help. Instead of adapting, they tend to stick with familiar routines. Rather than try and shape the service offer around them, they largely accept both the limitations of age and health, and also they accepted the professional advice that they were given about, well, this is all that you can have, and didn't try and push back. Rather than enjoying life, they were inevitably waiting for bad things to happen, and rather than reaching out and exchanging, they were trapped by the thought that they actually didn't think they have much to offer, and thus avoided sort of trying to reach out and make contact with others. When we looked at what we thought actually helped enable great living and that got to the sort of behaviours that I just identified, we saw four things emerge. People who are experiencing great living tended to have more open rather than closed minds. They tended to surround themselves with motivational relationships rather than just people who were dealing with their physical or material issues. They tended to have vibrant networks in their community rather than being isolated. And finally, they tended to have contact with services that actually were interested in their development, not just dealing with their immediate transactional needs. And so we took these ideas, we went back into the studio, the team got busy generating ideas which actually tried to help build those enablers. They then tried to visualize those and then took them back out to people and said, what do you think? In the top right-hand corner, that's Sandhya meeting with Peggy to talk about sharing zone, which was one of the ideas we came up with. Peggy's response at first was less than enthusiastic. Her response was, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with that. That looks like a program for old fuddy-duddies. And I'm not an old fuddy-duddy. So we took them back into the studio, we reworked them, we reworked both, if you like, the process, what they were, how it worked, as well as how it was presented, the language we used, the way that people would come into contact with it. We went back out again. That's Sandhya and Peggy having another go. I think they had 5 goes in total. We'd turned the initial offer into an iPad app, so it was a bit kind of brighter and interesting and certainly didn't appeal to the fuddy-duddy in Peggy's nature. And suddenly we actually started to get somewhere. And then from that, we turned these into a series of pitches, some of which you'll actually hear now. But basically, from this, we came up with 6 co-design solutions. Now, I should stress, these are still ideas at this point. I can't tell you that these work. I can tell you that they're grounded in some fairly rigorous thinking about the kind of change we want to see in people's lives, and we have been out and talked to people about whether or not this is something that would attract them. The next step on each of these is to go out and actually prototype them for real. So what did we do? And I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail, but to actually try and address the issue of shifting closed to open mindsets, we created something called A Bit Better. We designed an idea called Weavers to try and activate family and friends in a more useful, helpful way to reduce the stress levels on carers. We also thought about ways that we could activate the community in different ways to enable ageing in place and to make sure that people aren't socially isolated. And then finally, we also looked at the issue of designing help and services to be more focused on people's developmental needs and not just their immediate transactional needs. So, A Bit Better, Barbara you've met, spends a lot of time talking about the reasons she can't do something. We're interested in how you can actually move people from I can't to I can. Now this is a challenge because Barbara doesn't like groups. She's not attracted to anything that has mental health in the title because, as she says, I'm not crazy, and is unlikely to reach out to centre-based care. So we actually have to think differently about reaching these people, but reach them we have to, because these people are, finding ways to actually break into people who are extremely isolated is really, really important. So the model we came up with, A Bit Better, talks about developing the notion of a peer motivator, which is somebody who goes out into the houses to work with people, and by using innovative methods and materials to help people to either think their way out or to act their way out of their current situation, depending on what their learning style is. Some people will prefer a book or a movie to kind of think about these issues. Others might actually don't go for a conceptual way of thinking through their problems, might actually want to just try some things first. So, hence the fishing rod. And so the idea is that these peer motivators would actually work with people to help them put together some small steps to actually get them out of their house, trying different things, and to make progress in that way, to then capture that progress, and then in time to connect them to the more formalised service offers that are around. There's no point expecting these formal service offers to actually do the work because they don't get out into the people's houses in this way and actually spend the time to draw people out of their homes and out of their shells. So A Bit Better is designed to, will be designed to train mentors, to develop content for helping people make those early steps, and then to start actually shaping the formal service offering to potentially do more of this kind of work. And in that way, get more people like Barbara to move from I can't to I can. Weavers tries to address the issue of stress for those people who are in caring relationships. This is Helen. Helen is a full-time worker as well as being a carer. The current formal service offering, it basically treats the symptoms of stress rather than the root causes. When she's had enough, she can get 3 hours of respite to go get her hair done. She can receive counselling to talk about how stressed she is. Occasionally she might get the night off or a week off. Sometimes that actually causes as much stress as if she didn't have the respite, because often she's concerned about how the person she's caring for is actually faring in the accommodation. And then there are other educational programs and carer support things that largely talk about the issue without trying to address it. Helen, like many carers, have social networks around them. The extent to which they are actively involved in helping her with her care responsibilities is variable, and what we know is that the longer people are in caring relationships, often their energy and the time they have to go and support and continue to build these and activate these networks deteriorates over time. And so Weavers is actually designed to be an approach which helps the people who help. And the idea is to recruit a new type of role, which we call a weaver. And this is somebody who's had lived experience as a carer, and to actually go and meet with the carer to help them talk through the sort of the assets, the networks that they have available to draw on, and to think about how they might be able to activate that networks in different ways. So, and I guess also what's different here is, rather than waiting for the carer to get into a position of stress, this is actually designed to kick in at the point when people assume caring responsibilities. An example we had recently was an 83-year-old man went into the emergency department at the hospital. He was having sort of fainting spells. The intern who saw him had to remove his driver's license. He said, well, how am I going to get home? You know, I drove myself here. My family's in Melbourne, which is 700 kilometres away. So luckily they were able to make contact with the family, and they knew this was on the cards, and they were preparing to move from Melbourne to Adelaide at some point to start looking more, looking after this person more intensively. But that caring relationship began in an instant. And so this is designed to actually come in and help people at that moment and start to get them equipped to actually manage that relationship more effectively from the way in, right from the get-go. So the idea is people with cared experience come in, work with carers to help identify these networks, to check in from time to time to see how that's actually working for them, and to see whether or not they are utilising their networks effectively, or whether there are other things, strategies that they can adopt to try and get different people to help in different ways. And then finally, to look at capturing that experience and making that visible and shareable across many other people who are in caring roles. So the underlying idea is that rather than addressing the symptoms of stress, actually to proactively and preventatively try and actually set up relationships such that you try and reduce the background level of stress. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to sort of skip over these a little bit. Okay, thanks, Jussi. The next idea is sharing zone. Sharing zone is effectively designed to address the question of what might it look like to effectively enable people to age in place. This is Deirdre and Jean. We met them door knocking, and they have a lot of interests together. They talk quite frequently, and this relationship is a very important part of Jean's well-being in terms of her ageing in her local neighbourhood. Jean also receives formal care. She gets people to come in and mow her lawns, to shower her and to prepare her meals and food, but this is about 2 hours of the week, whereas other relationships are much much longer. And it's not just about the length of time, it's also about the quality. Deirdre and Jean can talk about all the things that they share in common. So the sharing zone attempts to try and change the question about what might it look like if we adopted a neighbourhood-based approach to care, both formal and informal. So the sharing zone would enable more local relationships to be built up around people who need care and to include the whole community. And the vision is that people could grow up and to grow old in these communities without needing to move into residential facilities, or at least to defer the point at which people need to move into residential care. The idea would be that the sharing zone would try and identify people with particular interests as well as particular talents, and that they can be drawn upon to actually help people in particular episodes of care. We would go around, and here's the iPad app for those of you who spotted it earlier. This would be a way of walking around the neighbourhood and asking people, what would you like to? Would you like to talk about knitting? Would you like to help out with handyman duties? Would you like to share a glass of wine? Would you like to talk about movies? And through that, start to establish who in the neighbourhood actually is there to help. We envisage that there would be a number of roles that would emerge. One is the connector, and that's the person who would actually go and find out who is around. There's the handyman, which is a person who has the kinds of skills and a bit of time to do sort of small, odd jobs. But also there is a role for formal care. But I think that what we propose is we think there's a really different way of reorganising the way a carer works. And I'm not sure if this concept travels to Europe, but I have heard that Finland has kind of some of the highest car ownership in Europe, so maybe it will travel, we'll see. When we looked at how carers actually did their work, we found that they travelled up to 230 kilometres a week driving around the neighbourhoods. So they spent more time in their car and less time actually caring with people. So what we wondered was whether or not you could actually hire people to cover a smaller geographic area and to actually take a more local interest in their own neighbourhood, and to effectively develop a different kind of care that's more relational and less about sort of the formal professional care response. Some of these roles will be paid, like the local carer. This would be a professional. Some of them will be amateurs. And when we tested this idea out with people, some of the amateurs weren't necessarily looking to get paid, but probably would respond well to discounts or incentives, maybe reductions in their council fees or local discounts in the community. That was sharing zone. Meals with Mates addresses the issue of social isolation. This is Susie. Susie gets her basic needs met through formal care. They do her shopping for her, they do her cleaning for her, and yet she spends the majority of her time eating tuna and crackers at home. And when they do deliver the meal, it looks like this. I should say the particular organisation didn't believe us when we said that this was a real photo that we took of the meal. They refused to believe that they would present the meal in this way. When we asked Susie what great living looked like for her, she said it was about eating good food, kangaroo and lobsters. It's about doing things that she enjoys when and where she wants. It's about learning to cook new things, and it's about having intelligent conversation. None of these are things that formal care provides. And we know that eating alone actually isn't that good for you. It reduces your nutritional intake, and loneliness kills more people than smoking. Now, Susie's not alone. There are lots of people like this. And some of them have interests, and some of them have interests in common. Susie likes horror movies. And so the idea behind Meals with Mates is we would actually try and find people in local communities who actually have shared interests and get them together to have a meal. It's not rocket science, but it actually plugs a real gap between formal care, which talks about preparing meals in a centre, so large sort of industrialised models of meal provision, and on one hand, and on the other hand, actually sort of delivering meals on wheels. I'm not sure if you have something similar in Finland, but actually sort of delivering meals to where people are at home and they remain isolated. And it tries to plug the gap between the two, getting people out of their homes and collecting and gathering around special interests. So Meals with Mates is designed to actually, the role of the host is to actually identify who might be interested in this and to try and put together different special interest groups and to meet up and to leverage the local businesses and so on to help them out. The final two are around activating services and help in a different way. The Ops Store is about creating more helpful help. This is John. John's an art curator. He's been a chef for 15 years. He's a handyman. He would love to volunteer, but he's really nervous about the fact that he'll probably end up stacking books in the library and not utilising his skills very effectively. Here's Betty. Betty gets formal care. Her carer comes in and showers her. When she asked her carer whether they could pop down to the shops to buy a cake for her niece's birthday, the answer was, sorry, I've only got 20 minutes, I'm only here to do the shower and then I have to leave. So she needs different types of support around her. So the Ops Store tries to actually identify who might be around in the community who have got different skills and different offers that we might be able to bundle up and put together in a catalogue. So you can actually see who in your neighbourhood might be able to help you bake a cake, who might be able to help you get your jewellery repaired, who might be able to help you do gardening. And then the Ops Store would actually recruit people who can provide these offers, they're micro businesses if you like, and to train them to actually work with people in the community and to provide the back office support to make sure that they're insured and police checks and all that kind of stuff. The Ops Store would work to actually connect people up, to make sure that they meet together and have a clear idea what they want to do something together and then to talk about how it went. And then in turn lead people to actually maybe choosing another opportunity or indeed actually graduating to be someone who gives an opportunity. So again, one of the other things this actually tries to reverse is this notion that if you are someone who needs care and support, you will always need care and support and there's nothing that you can actually offer back. Some people may need help with handyman duties, but they may be great at knitting. And how do we actually create different kinds of solutions in our community to enable that kind of exchange of skills and experience and wisdom? And finally, the last one is Care Reflect. And we saw in the presentation from the Deputy Mayor that the amount that's due to be expended on care is about to balloon here in Finland. It's the same in Australia. It's about to increase threefold. At the same time, we're losing carers from the industry. 25% say they're going to quit after a year, 75% say they'll leave after 5 years. This creates a huge amount of expenditure that is wasted in terms of induction and recruitment. And in the meantime, the care profession itself, and certainly this is the Australian experience, I can't speak for Europe, has very little by the way of professional development, a clear articulated career path. You're either a carer or you're an administrator, and there's nothing in between, and little by the way of job feedback. So Care Reflect is effectively designed to try and bring reflective practice, which has been used in nursing, clinical medicine, education, and a range of other areas, and bring it into this profession. We would identify those carers who really are very good at what they do, and rather than promoting them to administration, we'll actually give them a championing role where they bring together groups for reflective practice, which they run, and they help people get better at what they do and to come up with new strategies for caring more effectively. At the same time, we can also involve students who are studying caring and nursing so they can actually understand what the reality is like of caring, and indeed we can actually start to prepare the supply of new recruits to be better able to hit the ground running. So I'm conscious I rushed that a little bit, but this is designed to throw a whole bunch of ideas which hopefully we can continue to discuss in the panel session and maybe later over the drinks. Where we're at with these ideas, as I said, we're down here. We're about to prototype. If you watch this space over the next 3 to 6 months, we'll have a lot more to say about how whether these things actually worked. If we looked at what we did with Family by Family, we spent months or weeks prototyping, months in startup, and then probably years developing something to scale. I suspect we'll see something like this in our work in ageing, And my final slide is, I guess, some pearls of wisdom about how we think you do radical innovation in and around these social challenges. The first is to start by setting more ambitious outcomes. Not outcomes that matter to the system, but outcomes that matter to people. In the middle, actually thinking about the way that you use people, the community, to actually be the resource that actually delivers these solutions, and ultimately to look for solutions that actually shift behaviour sustainably. Thank you very much.